Hello everyone, this is Dr. Gear and this is Unit 4, Chapter 7, and the topic is Performance Evaluation. In my opinion, this is one of the weakest aspects of educational leadership and management, and I'll give you a couple reasons why I believe that. Since most of us come to the ranks of educational administration and educational leadership through the teaching ranks, most of us by personality and nature are what I would call people pleasers. And this trait continues on through our administrative work because oftentimes we're not even aware of this particular trait in our personality. Further, I would contend that evaluation is weak because we have no incentive to be honest and give negative evaluations in the same way that the private sector does. We do not have a profit motive, and the outcome, which is improved student achievement, ultimately is a very arcane and difficult to measure construct. So we don't get immediate feedback like someone who's the CEO of a business might as he or she watches the bottom line of their business grow. Another reason that I think performance evaluation is especially weak in educational leadership is that I don't think that administrative programs don't do a very good job in terms of stressing the importance of this step, both for the individual and organization's growth. As such, I believe we are really doing our students who are under our care a great disservice in that by not challenging the status quo behaviors of both individuals in the organization, we allow entrenched bad practice to continue. Further, I would also say that we suffer from what's called the Lake Wobegon effect, which comes from the book by Garrison Keillor, where all the men are good looking, the women are pretty, and the children are above average. And if you think about it, how often have we actually had one of our administrators who are evaluating us challenge our practice? Generally, everyone is doing great when we evaluate instructional methodology and or even support staff work. It's an easy trap to get into because it's one which facilitates that idea that we're people pleasers. However, it leads to a false sense of competency and ability, which in the long run has detrimental effects to the organization. I'm now going to the second slide. The second slide talks about important considerations in evaluation, and I'd like to elaborate first on the systems approach. The systems approach is one in which one aspect of an organization affects those other parts that are connected to it. Sometimes that connection is very apparent, and other times it's very hard to see. And one of the things that you need to keep in mind is that the growth or weakness in one side of a system has effects on others, seen and unseen. For instance, let me give you an example. Let's consider for a second that overall the instruction in a school is poor. That would lead to poor student achievement metrics or measurements, which in turn may stimulate thinking around a new staff development program. My point here is you see how one action inside the organization or school in this particular case leads to another outcome, which then leads to another outcome. So that basically summarizes the systems approach. In other words, there's linkages between parts of the organization. And I mentioned to you in one of the previous sessions the whole idea of black box theory. That being that in public policy, what we have is inputs and outputs and these inputs go into what has been termed the black box. Inside that black box, we're sometimes not sure what goes on, and coming out of the black box comes all different types of outcomes, both anticipated and some not anticipated. If you are interested in learning more about systems theory, probably the place to start is with theorist Peter Senge. He will lead you through the idea of closed and open loop systems. Very simply, a closed loop system has a feedback loop involved, so that as part of the system there is a feedback mechanism, whereas open loop systems, there isn't that feedback loop. So you have to scrutinize the system differently and with different tools, because the system itself does not provide you feedback. This slide also considers the reason for evaluation, and very simply, I think, as you know, I have an economist lens when it comes to a lot of these issues, and evaluation is the tool by which we measure the effectiveness and efficiency of the organization. It gives evidence of administrative competence, so it's significant in that it undergirds confidence in the administration, albeit the superintendent and his or her cabinet, all the way down through the building level. So good evaluation allows people to get a sense of how they are doing, and as a result of that, they're able to sometimes alter their own behaviors to improve them. Evaluation measures people's efforts. It provides us data, which ultimately we can use to discuss with various parties their development and growth, or ultimately these discussions and evaluatory instruments become the tools for discharge of the person. Another important part of evaluation and another reason for evaluation is that it is really the engine of Kaizen. I know that I've mentioned that term to you in previous classes, and Kaizen comes from total quality management and the Japanese application of that. And simply, it's the Japanese term for continuous improvement, that whole idea that we continue to look at process, procedures, systems to continuously improve them, improve our own performance within them, and as managers and leaders to assist others to improve their performance as well. And the reason that this is so important is ultimately it drives student achievement in schools. In other words, without a consistent examination of practice in curriculum, instruction, assessment, staff development, and all other aspects of school life, we are not doing our best to maximize student achievement within our realms of responsibility. And that ultimately is our prime mission. In closing, the importance of evaluation, the reason why it's so important, is it gives feedback essential for improvement. Without feedback, we have no sense of where we stand in terms of the system itself. So it is the job of the educational leader and manager to provide that feedback. Sometimes that can be a relatively unpleasant task, but I would challenge you to think about the methods by which you deliver that information, and also how in your day-to-day life as an educational leader or manager you develop the relationships and rapport with your staff so that they respect and begin to welcome your feedback. It's not a one-shot deal, and it's not always negative. So feedback goes something like this. I've found this to be a pretty good rule of thumb in terms of giving feedback to people, all the way from students to coaching to working with employees, is that I call it the 10 to 1 ratio. For every negative sentence or negative piece of feedback you give someone, you have underscored their positive aspects with 10 positive reinforcement statements. That's a lot of work, but I believe it builds the type of environment by which people will embrace your criticism and make strides to try and implement it. Rebor also revisits the significance of the job description here, and I guess I would use the metaphor that the job description is similar to the rules of the road or rules of the game. It describes the playing field for someone. In other words, how do I do my job? What are the parameters around it? What are the expectations? And through this job description, the person knows the lay of the land, so to speak, and can make educated self-evaluation. Another aspect of having good job descriptions is it is the tool by which you compare and contrast evidence of performance with the job description to make decisions around the competence of the employee. I'm now moving on to page 3, and I'm going to elaborate first on the development of a performance evaluation process. And I would contend that as an educational leader, this is a prime opportunity for collaboration with your staff. Going back to some of the theory that we have learned previously, theory Y and theory Z about worker behavior, one of the things that theory Z contends, and that's William Uchi to remind you of the theorists, is that who is better than the person who is doing the job to provide input into all of the process procedures, and in this particular case, the evaluatory instruments. This is the person who's working closest to the task and has the best understanding of when that task is done well or when it is not. So, in conclusion, what that means is you have an opportunity to pull together a team of some of your most competent people in whatever part of the organization you're dealing with, albeit instruction, albeit maintenance, and working with them to build, sometimes the first step being a job description, but oftentimes now how do you evaluate that job description and how people are fulfilling its components. One of the things that this does is it gives the employees a sense of ownership of the process and a feeling that they are being valued by the leadership, and that this is the area where we often talk about teacher leadership. When teachers work in environments such as this to develop for the evaluation instrument, that's a classic example of teacher leadership at work. The benefit of having this type of structure is also these people who work on this evaluation process thoroughly understand it, can articulate it to their peers, and serve as champions because they have ownership of it. Just a few notes on instruments of evaluation. I can't stress enough to you the importance that they are well constructed with lots of thought into them about how they can capture what is going on inside somebody's job. So this takes some consideration. Again, This is a place where the people who are doing the job can give you feedback and oftentimes can give you benchmarks by which you can judge whether or not a person is competently achieving the outcomes of his or her job. They need to be concise, they need to be easy to use, and they need to become public in that people can then understand what the criterion are by which he or she is going to be judged, much like the use of rubrics in the grading process. One of the things that I would suggest is that these instruments need to be revisited occasionally to review their efficacy and to improve them if needed. One of the things that you should keep in mind as you develop these forms is how can they be adapted easily to technology. And this is going to be an area that continues to grow, and the use of various tools will be adopted and stored inside various databases. So we are now going to areas like what will be the role of video in this. For instance, in the state of New York, in order for teachers to get their permanent certification, they have to send into state ed a tape of a lesson. So perhaps the day is coming when we will use flip cams or other such technological tools to capture pieces of a lesson for analysis inside our evaluation process. Now moving on to slide 4. And this deals with the termination procedure. ReBoard talks a lot around terminating the employment of tenured teachers, which obviously in South Carolina has a little bit different color or flair to it since there is not tenure. However, I would point out to you that much of what ReBoard points out in this particular section is applicable to the South Carolina models as well. A couple of things that I'd point out is note the intricacy of the paper trail that is involved. This is very important in that it provides protection both for the employee and the employer. For instance, for the employer, it gives evidence that can be used to support a case against accusations of discrimination or a lack of due process in the termination procedure. Through this paper trail, the administration demonstrates that they have recognized the rights of the employee, oftentimes showing lots of warnings that their conduct is their conduct or job performance is not acceptable, and also has provided opportunities for the employee to improve performance. However, in cases where there is imminent physical, sexual, or mental conditions that make the continued employment of the person certainly a problem, you need to make sure that you're working very carefully with human resources and the school attorney. One of the things that you oftentimes will see in the media is an almost accusatory type of tenor to stories around school employees who've been placed on leave with pay. That is part of the due process conditions, in that we have to continue to remember that even inside the employment situation, people have the rights of the Constitution, and that is one is innocent until proven guilty. So that's why someone is put on administrative leave with pay. Now, there are some exceptions to that, and that certainly will be gone into some detail in the school law course. One of the things that you have to keep in mind that there are court cases around employment-employee relationships in which that relationship is seen as a property right of the employee. So that is why this due process issue becomes so important, because in effect what the employer is doing is depriving the employee of a property right. So there needs to be a demonstration of due process before that occurs. And again, when faced with situations where you believe that termination is the outcome, this needs to be a process. You need to be talking with HR and your school's attorney, whatever form that takes. This is around developing termination procedures, and the first thing that I would remark about that is that a resignation is much better than termination for all involved, both the employer and the employee, in that it is oftentimes a way for the employee to, quote, save face and walk away from dignity. So rather than saying that he or she was discharged, terminated, or fired, they can say, well, I decided to resign, it wasn't a good fit. And one of the things that I would say to you is that this is some of the toughest work you will do as an educational administrator. These are the things that will keep you up at night, and if you don't lose sleep about terminating someone, I challenge you that you haven't thought it through carefully enough. This is a very, very important decision in that it tears at the cultural fabric of your school, it costs money, it is egg on the face of the whole organization in that someone brought this person in. So you have to work hard with someone to hopefully provide him or her with opportunities to improve his or her performance to the point where termination is not necessary. If you've done the proper steps and you've worked very hard in terms of trying to improve an employee's performance, most likely he or she is not going to find the termination a total surprise. And as such, a couple of tips on that meeting when that is going to occur. Again, I would stress to you the opportunity to resign rather than be terminated is one that you may want to offer to the employee. One thing that I did was I would always have an irrevocable letter of resignation ready, so that if a employee decided that resignation was the path that he or she wanted to take, that you had the paperwork done, that it was ready to go, and as such take advantage of the person's decision making and not give him or her the opportunity to reconsider that decision. In New York, and I'm not sure about South Carolina, again this will come up in school law, once that letter of resignation is accepted by the clerk of the Board of Education, it becomes in force. One of the things that I would have you consider when involved in a termination procedure is who, what, when, and how of the termination. One of the things that you may want to consider is having someone else in the room. Consider security. consider the acquisition of whatever school property the employee may have, such as keys, walkie-talkies, a laptop. All of those things need to be returned, and this is during a very delicate time in the employee-employer termination process. One of the things that I would suggest is that if you terminate someone, they need to be escorted from the property, and I would even consider doing this in times of resignation, because you never know how somebody might react when he or she gets out of your office. I have, in fact, contacted police to have them standing by somewhere in the neighborhood when I was doing a termination, in the sense that I was trying to be proactive in if there was a lot of emotion. I never had to employ them, but again, I was looking at worst case scenario. Because remember, this is dicey territory. You're dealing with an emotion-laden process. It's all tied up in somebody's self-image, their paycheck, family issues. There's all kinds of things that go into this equation, known and unknown. So I would suggest to you that you need to be prepared. Generally, I've never had one go really bad, but again, it doesn't preclude that it couldn't. So I would suggest to you that you need to think through it very carefully and lose some sleep over this decision, because it is so important to both the organization and the employee. And I would suggest to you that if you do a termination correctly and you have done everything you can to help this person improve his or her job performance, that the termination procedure will go well. And I've actually had people thank me at the end of this process. Now I'm going on to page 6, technology and performance evaluation. Rebor mentions the use of personal digital assistants, PDAs. There has become some widespread and popular use of these tools in order to document teacher behavior and evaluation situations. It's an attempt to quantify the behaviors associated with teaching. However, I would pose to you that much of this is still a judgment call and a human process. When dealing with the evaluation of employees, I would suggest you that as you become more experienced, you need to trust what your, quote, gut is telling you.